Most people lose betting the NFL because they're looking at the wrong information. They look at records, they look at star players, they decide who is the better team and then bet them. And they wonder why they keep losing. I've been in the sports betting industry for 12 years and I've made every single one of those mistakes. I lost 2 full bankos before I figured out what I was actually doing wrong. It wasn't that I didn't know sports, it was that I was looking at the wrong things. So today I'm going to show you 3 strategies that I look at every single time before placing a bet on the NFL or college football. Strategy number 1 is fade the public and reverse line movements. Now you don't want to blindly just fade the public. There is a strategy behind it and I'm going to show you that in just 1 second. Now before we talk about reverse line movements, it is very important to have the foundation down of how Vegas works and how they're looking to balance the books. So let's say for example the Tigers played the Dolphins. The book's goal is to have 50% of the money on the Dolphins and 50% on the Lions. And what they really make their money on is the VIG, that minus 110, or some call it the juice. That is what their purpose and goal is every single matchup. Now the reality of the matter is that is very hard to do, and in most cases there's going to be more money on certain teams than others. But that is how they create the lines, with the thought of having action on both sides of the table. Because think about this, if they make a line so appealing and 100% of the money goes to that team, for example, and they lose that, that's a very big liability for them. So they have PhD, they have Harvard, MIT, and they have the best technology to create lines and to beat the public. Now that we have the foundation down, let's go over an example. And we're talking about the Lions versus the Dolphins. And as you guys can see right here, the opening line was at minus 10.5 for the Lions, and for the Dolphins at plus 10.5. Up here, I know it's a little hard to read, but 80% of the bets are going to the Lions, and 90% of the handle is going to the Lions. Now, based on what we just covered with the foundation, how Vegas is looking to create the lines and to have 50% of the bets in handle, this line should move in favor of the Lions. What do I mean by that? It should move up to 11.5 or 12.5 with the money and support at this to start the day. Now, why? Because as you make the Lions more expensive, you make the Dolphins a little bit more appealing. They're underdog, the money line goes up. But more importantly, you're giving the Dolphins more of an opportunity to cover a bigger spread. And if it goes up to 12.5, now a lot of people are going to buy it to 14, which is 2 touchdowns, and a lot of people are going to like that. So ultimately, with this in mind, it's very important to understand where the money should go in the beginning of the day when you see the opening lines, especially when you're seeing 80 and 90% of the bets in handle for one team. I would go as far as to say that 70. If you see 70%, and I'm going to write it down right here, if you see 70% of the bets and handle on one team, the line should move in their favor and make them more expensive. So now the day goes on and the line moves to minus 9 and plus 9 for the Dolphins, and the money and the bets still stay at 80 or 90% of the bets and handle, and the line is sitting at 9. That is what we call reverse line movements, and I'll put RLM to make it shorter. Whenever you see reverse line movements, that means Vegas is adjusting for a reason. Why are they adjusting? That is when we have to think like sharps, like investors, and not with our emotions. A lot of the time, as a public bettor or somebody that's new to the game, you see the line going down and you find it more appealing to take the lines because now it's going down, less points for you to cover. But that is where Vegas is potentially lying a trap, and that is how they win long term. Vegas has been in business, and the sportsbooks have been in business for over 50 years, if not more. Think about that. They're not losers. So with that in mind, you got to think like them. And you got to make sure you're not falling for traps when you see a situation like this. Now again, if the line pushed to minus 12, minus 11, and it pushed up because the money and support was going to the Lions, then that makes sense. But whenever you see this, it is very important for you to A, avoid the game, or don't fall for the trap and fade the public. So strategy number 1 really lies in fading the public, which typically always loses, and reverse line movements. Before we move on to strategy 2, I want to cover a key example that is very important for you guys to understand for the NFL and college football season. So I'm going to give you another example here, and we're going to cover it. Bills-Rams line opened up at minus 3 in favor of the Bills, and Rams at plus 3. Let's say this is a Bills home game. Now 60% of the bets in handle are going to the Bills as of right now, and the line is sitting at minus 3. Now why am I covering this specific number? There are a couple key numbers that you need to know in NFL and college football. That is 3, and that is 7, and that is 10. and the halves in between those. So 7.5, 6.5, 2.5, 3.5. Those are key numbers. Now, why are they key numbers? Because typically games end by that. They end by a field goal, they end by a touchdown, or they end by a field goal and a touchdown. Now, I'm going to go and say that there's another key number that not many talk about, and that is 4. Because a lot of games end by 4, specifically 4. So pay attention to those key numbers. Now let's go on to where the line is closing. So now there's 3 hours till the game, and the line went to 2.5 with still 60% of the bets in handle on the Bills. This is a very important part for you guys to take out your notepads and take some notes. Whenever you see this type of movement, Vegas moving it from -3, which typically games end by that, to -2.5, with a home team or with a team attracting 60 or 70% of the bets in handle, that to me is an automatic fade or stay away. But typically I'm fading that spot. I buy this to +3, +3.5, buy -150, and cover the field goal if they lose by a field goal. And I even like to money line these spots. Now obviously there's a lot more that goes into it that I'm going to cover here in a second with strategy 2 of the stats, the injuries, and what to look for in order to take this spot. So make sure that you guys understand reverse line movements, because it is very important, especially in weeks 1 through 4. That is where reverse line movement tends to hit the most. And if you guys still don't understand it or want more examples, you guys can test my community out where I cover this every single day, in-depth video analysis covering every single game of the slate for my community and those that want to invest instead of gamble long term. So now we move on to strategy number 2, which is key stats. And it's very important for you to know what stats to look at. A lot of the information out there is useless, but there are certain stats that if you pay attention to, you are going to profit more than most. And most people understand wide receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends, fantasy, right? That's what we draft during fantasy, and the players that we know and the ones that get paid the big bucks and the most famous. Now, other than the quarterback, what is the most important position or the key positions that are going to reflect whether a team is good or bad long term? And if you do not know this, I want you to pay attention to it because it's one that most people ignore. And that is the offensive line and defensive lines. You can be the best running back in the entire world. If you don't have a good offensive line that can block for you, you are not going to do shit. And vice versa. If you're a team that has a great offense but has no defense, and specifically have no defensive linemen, a team is going to run all over you and control the time. And that is what Tom Brady and Bill Belichick did. They knew how to run the ball, control the clock, and win games. And that's the most important part for these teams. Winning games, it's not about being flashy or pumping the stats up. It's for them winning, and a lot of the time it's by the offensive line and defensive line. If you can run the ball really well, you can have a bad quarterback and you're still going to make him look like a star because he's always going to have a position where he's going to be open and he's not going to have too much pressure. So pay attention to this, and how do we know if an offensive line or a defensive line is good? That's what I'm about to cover next. So when do the best offensive linemen and defensive linemen come into the game and play it down? It's typically the most important one, which is this one. It's third down and red zone efficiency. Now the important part is to look for the offensive side of things and defensive side of things. How are these teams performing in the offensive third down conversion and red zone efficiency, and defensively as well? That is typically when you see the best defensive linemen and the best offensive linemen. Now typically you're going to see in the NFL a lot of the times that the teams that dominate the third down and red zone efficiencies are the best teams. And last year one of them was the Super Bowl champion, the Seattle Seahawks. Another team that converted very highly on third down and red zone efficiency were the Rams. Defensively, the Seahawks led on both of these as well. Shocker why they won the league, right? When you convert on third down and red zone efficiency, you make it very tough for the opposition to control the clock and to gain momentum because you keep on converting on the key conversions that matter long term in the game. So pay attention to the offensive and defensive side of things for both these stats. Now that we understand that the offensive line and the defensive line are one of the most important positions, and we covered the third down and red zone efficiency, let's talk about the other stats that matter, that most people ignore. And remember, we're looking at both the offense and defensive side of things. Now, a key stat that tells you whether an offensive line or defensive line is good is pressure and sack rates. Both offensive and defensive is important to keep an eye on. Especially, team, when you're facing a team that relies a lot on the running game. You want to know how that press and that sack rate is going to be. Along with that too, what you want to know in these type of stats is rushing efficiency. And a lot of people tend to ignore injuries. So a very big part of my analysis every single day, as a matter of fact, one of the first things I like to look at is the power ranking for the offensive and defensive linemen and the injuries. Who is in and who is out, because that determines whether a team can run a little bit more or can run a little bit less, and are going to depend on certain key players. So let's keep an eye on these stats, and now let's go to strategy number 3. The last strategy, and one of the most important ones, is schedule. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is a big reason why a lot of the people last year were talking shit about the Patriots. And it's because of their strength of schedule. Throughout the season, there's 32 teams, and they have the 32nd strength of schedule, meaning they have the easiest strength of schedule. And it makes sense why the Seattle Seahawks dominated them. A, May was a young player, and B, they really hadn't faced oppositions like the Seahawks had throughout the season. So strength of schedule is very important for you to analyze in every game that you're paying attention to, because you're going to see some discrepancies throughout the season. And that is going to give you an idea of A, is a team really valued the right way, or B, is there a spot where I could potentially attack that gap and profit a little bit because Vegas is missing the strength of schedule, or more importantly, there's reverse line movements and people are missing that the team that's getting reverse line movement has a tougher strength of schedule. So SOS, and I'm going to leave it at SOS because that is strength of schedule. Now the second thing that you want to pay attention to is short weeks. Teams that are having a short week. They played Sunday and now they have to play for Thursday night football. How are they going to come out? And there's websites that I'm going to share with you here in a bit that you can look at all these stats that I'm sharing you with today. Strategy 1, Strategy 2, and Strategy 3. Strength of schedule, short weeks, the records in short weeks, the advantages and disadvantages. So short weeks is another scheduling spot that you need to pay attention to. Now the other part is back-to-back road games. And this applies through most leagues. MLB, NBA, NHL, when teams are on the road consistent, they get tired. And they're not the same team than if they were at home in their couch resting for the game. Back-to-back road games typically creates chaos for a lot of teams. Cross-country travel is the next one. This fatigues a lot of teams, especially with teams playing in Europe nowadays. A lot of these teams are getting injured because of that, because they're traveling so much and not getting the proper rest. And more importantly, cross-country travels during short weeks, even more important to pay attention to. Now the next one is one we all pay attention to, which is divisional games. And if you have been paying attention to the NFL, or if you're newer to the NFL, typically divisional games are a bit chaotic. Teams that are not supposed to win end up covering games or potentially beating their divisional opponent because there is a rivalry there. So pay attention to divisional games because a lot of these times, these lines are a lot more enticing. They're a little bit more trappy, and Vegas is looking to trap you in that situations. They're a little bit more trappy as well because of the history. Typically, divisional games, they play each other more times throughout the year, and there's more history for Vegas to know a little bit more about the games than you. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is teams coming off emotional win. And sorry for my handwriting. Emotional wins. That is the next part that you want to pay attention to. And in the good old saying of investing, sell high, buy low. In this situation, when a team is coming off an emotional high, the public is all over them. And that is when you sell on that. And potentially have a good spread that you can cover, or potentially money line, and you profit a good amount. Last one is prime time games. We all know them, we all love them, and that is where majority of the money comes in to these games. And that is where reverse line movement comes into play a lot more. That is where most of the money comes in and where Vegas makes majority of their money. So pay attention to these scheduling spots, take a picture, screenshot them below so you guys can have them and not fall for spots that majority of the public does and loses because of. Every strategy, every tool is covered in one website, and it's Profit Edge. It covers every strategy that I covered for you today, and it gives it to you. You don't have to know it, you don't have to look for it. It tells you where the reverse line movement is, where the scheduling spot is, the stats that matter is all there, and a lot more. It's also covering the money splits, and it tells you exactly where the money's going and what spots you should be careful with. Training with me daily, you get daily analysis with me. Video, in-depth, 20 minutes covering every single game and every single spot that I covered with you today. An AI that we're training that has been awesome over the last few days, and a lot more. If you're interested, you can get it 50% off with promo code NFL, and you can try it out today for $1. That is it for today, team. If you enjoyed it, please share the show with a couple buddies that like to sports bet and would like to learn about it. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment below with any questions you guys may have or any video suggestions you guys may want to watch, and I'll make it next.